Chapter 14, Part 2 of 40,000 Miles Over Land and Water. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 40,000 Miles Over Land and Water by Ethel Gwendoline Vincent. The Straits Settlements, Part 2. A most exciting incident occurred just before the pilot left us. 2 Chinese jumped overboard and swam ashore to escape their articles. Their employers shipped them on board, advancing them some money as a pledge, and then, when they are clear of the harbor, they escape by swimming on shore, or by having a boat waiting to pick them up. Their employers have no redress. The Japan belongs to Apcar and Company of Calcutta and is employed in the opium trade between Calcutta and Hong Kong. The opium is government grown in India, and it forms the most valuable of cargoes, 2,400 chests being usually put on board, each of the approximate value of 1,200 pounds. The Japan has small accommodation, but some Parsis and an Armenian priest are our only passengers. Captain and Mrs. Gardner do the honors of their ship most pleasantly. Wednesday, December 31st. We were pointed out the coast of Malacca, but saw it so dimly that I should call it distinguishing by intuition, as we knew we were in the straits of that name. On our port bow were the heads of Akin, which we looked at with interest, when papers so lately have been talking about the rescue of the Nisero crew, seized by the Sultan of Akin. The Dutch have good reason to hate this paltry little potentate, for not only have they had to pay the 40,000 pounds as the ransom for a British shipwreck crew, but the war is swallowing up the 3 million pound surplus revenue, which we heard so much about when in Java. We passed Pulo Jara, or Broom Island, after dinner, the point of departure, and where ships alter their course 4 degrees for Penang. We sat up on the deck in the moonlight on this, the last night of the old year, and so ended our year of 1884. January 1st, 1885. The new year came in for us at 5 in the morning, with 3 prolonged whistles from the funnel of the Japan as we came to the lovely entrance to the Penang roadstead. I hurried up on deck in dishabille, and found the chill of night yet on the beautifully wooded island where the lighthouse sends forth a brilliant light. The full yellow moon in the dark blue sky was just standing over it, and as we looked, a shooting star fell down to earth. On the other hand, faint tinges of red and yellow in the east told of the coming morn. With that strangely rapid change of the tropics, dawn turned to sunrise over the sugar plantations of Province Wellesley. We saw the native pilot, with his red petticoat fluttering in the breeze on the bridge. We passed the large island, which is sacred to the leper hospital, of which there are some 300, chiefly among the Chinese immigrants. Some little fishing vessels that had been out all night, with their lights still burning in the bows, were hovering about the patches of bamboo stakes. The sun rose, and we saw the red and white roofs of Penang clustering thickly on the flat peninsula, backed by the hill of 2,000 feet, a mass of jungle. We had a cup of early tea on deck, and then I went down to dress, and none too soon, as it turned out. As we anchored within half a mile of the shore, Mr. Harwood, the registrar of the Supreme Court, came on board, with an invitation from Colonel Dunlop, the resident councillor of Penang, to spend the day at the government bungalow on the hill. All arrangements had been made for us, and by 6 o'clock the harbor master's gig had landed us on the wharf. A gharry drove us through the town, past the Roman Catholic Church, whose tapers were lighted and bell-tolling, along by the green lawn that forms a cricket ground, bordered by the sea. The Chinese are as supreme here in numbers as at Singapore. They were driving the patient white bullocks, toiling along with the ox cart, or more strange still, the huge gray buffalo guided by a ring passed through the nose. They were tailoring or tinkering in their open shops, and carrying on the trade of Penang in their bamboo baskets, slung across the shoulders. We saw many a picturesque bit of native life outside the mat hut. Klings or Madrasi women lounging about, with their nostrils pierced with bright gold coins, and wrapped in the thin strip of gauze. We were driving along a beautiful road, where the palm trees and coconuts arched overhead, and it was most delicious and enjoyable in the cool morning air. Arrived at the bottom of the hill, the promised chairs and coolies were nowhere to be seen, and we felt rather blank for a few minutes, until we determined to walk to the waterfall. We wandered along a shady path passing between the decayed pillars of a former gateway. In a neighboring cocoa grove, some natives were laying out the bare ground for a garden. The waterfall is the celebrated beauty of Penang, and when we only saw some streams of water trickling down the side of a mountain between the jungle, we were greatly disappointed. Our chairs and coolies were waiting for us on our return, the leaders being distinguished by their white vests. The coolie proper wears nothing but the sarong folded like a short petticoat and caught up in front in the belt when walking. It is to be noted that these natives, who consider so little ordinary clothing necessary, invariably have the head covered by a heavy turban or cap. We got into the chairs, and 6 coolies prepared to carry us up the hill. 2 in front tandem between the shafts, which they support by a bamboo pole slung between their shoulders, and 2 in the same manner behind. One walked on either side to steady the chair. The motion is so easy and pleasant, and the coolies swing along at a great pace, though not attempting to keep step. We enjoyed a very charming 2 hours, being carried round the zigzags of the hill in the midst of jungle that might be called virgin jungle, so tropical and dense was the vegetation. It was an ideal of the Indian life we read about: the early morning, the jungle, and the coolies. Sometimes the coolies would accomplish one of the steep gradients by a sudden run, but at all times they worked patiently along, perspiring from every pore, and some of them blowing lustily. It was becoming very hot as we reached the top of the hill, and we found that Colonel Dunlop was not staying at the government, but at the convalescent bungalow, a little further on. Here on the veranda he welcomed us, with Mr. Justice Wood and Old Westminster, Major Coffey in command of the detachment of the Enniskillen Fusiliers, stationed at Penang, and Mr. Maxwell, another of Sir Benson's sons. Mr. Maxwell is Commissioner of Lands and was recently sent over to Akin to arrange for the release of the Nacero crew. Jaded officials and businessmen from Singapore and Penang come up 2,000 feet to one of these bungalows on the hill and recruit amid the perfect stillness and beautiful monotony of life up here. Beneath lies ever a most superb and glorious view of Penang on its peninsula, separated by an arm of the sea from the coconut groves and sugar canes of Province Wellesley. Below and around them are hills of varying size, showing in places the poverty of the soil, but for the most part covered with jungle. The 2 islands in the sea look almost artificial, so unnaturally glassy is the water around them. In the garden at the back, where our coolies were sleeping in the blaze of the sun, after their struggle up the hill, we see a repetition of the view. the hills and the sea, but without Penang. In the center of this garden, a huge block of granite, on which trees and ferns are growing, raises its druidical head. Some Goth, the other day, proposed to blast it away, for it destroys all prospect of lawn tennis. After tiffin, we went for a stroll in the woods below the bungalow. In the jungle there, we saw many new tropical specimens. The wild coconut palm, which bears no fruit. The monkey's cup, which is something like the slipper orchid and contains in its dark red cup, shut with a lid, a small quantity of water. A black rock, with a tree growing out of it, without any apparent hold for the roots, was marked with roller indentations that seemed to indicate the glacier action of past ages. We also saw the atap, a creeper which is the dread of the jungle explorer. It throws out a shoot with thin, green leaves resembling a straggling branch of palm, but when seen near, there are 3 sharp little claws, which tear and cut pitilessly when brushed against. This jungle is full of monkeys, who sit chattering on the branches of the trees in the early morning and evening, but we saw none now, as they were resting during the midday heat. On returning to the bungalow, we had a feast of English newspapers, reading and resting in the veranda. Dr. Hampshire, the colonial surgeon, telephoned up from Penang an invitation to dinner that evening, which we accepted through the same medium. Remembering the shortness of the tropical twilight, we collected our troop of coolies around us about 5 o'clock and walked a little way down, accompanied by the gentleman, to see a magnificent view. The descent in the cool of the evening was very pleasant, the coolies swinging downhill at a great pace, whilst the 2 supporters acted as drags round the steep corners. The road is splendidly made, with ridges to prevent the rain washing down the sand. The light did not last, and ere we reached the bottom of the hill, we were wrapped in the gloom and great stillness of the forest. Here, a similar disaster to the non-appearance of the chairs in the morning awaited us. There was no gharry. The coolies, however, made signs to us to get into the chairs again, and that they would take us on, but only, as it turned out, to the first hotel. Here they rebelled and refused to go further, and we were powerless to remonstrate, not speaking the language. The hotel was small and ill-looking, kept by a Chinaman, but we entered in the hope of finding someone who would understand us enough to send off for a gharry. It was quite dark, and Dr. Hampshire's house a long way off. 2 German gentlemen were inside. They said there were no gharries to be had, but they volunteered to give us each a seat in the 2 traps that we had seen waiting outside, and to deposit us at our destination. It was a happy way for us out of our dilemma, and we were much indebted to our friends in need, friends indeed. We dined and spent a very pleasant evening, suffering from the heat of Penang after the cool air of the mountain. A gharry took us to the landing pier, and so late as it was, we had no choice but to take a sampan to row across in the moonlight to the ship. The tide was running very strong, and the sampan is but a frail bark, propelled by the natives standing up. We first narrowly escaped striking the rudder of the ship in coming round to the further side, and then the current swept us away from the gangway. However, we were landed safely on board by 11 o'clock, very tired after a day beginning at 5 a.m. Nevertheless, we felt we had thoroughly enjoyed a very novel and pleasant New Year's Day. Friday, January 2nd. We went off with the captain in the ship's boat directly after breakfast, and were fortunate enough in finding an interpreter on the wharf. Malay is the current language of the Straits settlements, among the variety of nationalities which gather in their towns. It is an easily learned language, and from its soft, sweet accent, is called the Italian of the East. Beach Street is very narrow and picturesque, gay with the wares displayed on counters in the street, and the motley crowd of variously colored skins. I went with C to the bank. The large, whitewashed room with the green cloth table in the center has not exactly the businesslike look of our banks. All the cashiers are Chinese, who count out the heavy silver dollar pieces with great rapidity. The dollar here is worth 3 shillings and 6 pence, but they suffer much in the Straits settlements from having only 20, 15, and 10-cent pieces, and no half-dollar. It is strange to notice that wherever the dollar or a high monetary unit exists, there the necessities of life become proportionately dear. It is so throughout America, and here in the Straits settlements, especially at Singapore and Penang, which are very expensive places to live in. The officials are apt to complain that when apportioning their salaries, government did not make sufficient allowance for this. The favorite mode of payment, however, in the Straits is by chits, or an IOU. You give the driver of your gharry a chit, as much as you do your tradesman, and at the end of the month they employ a chitty, who charges some small percentage to collect these chits. We saw some more of the curious life in Chinatown, that is compressed into the usual nutshell, at Penang, and also went into a joss house. The roof of a joss house is curiously pointed at the ends, with a sweeping depression in the center, and is adorned with blue and green dragons and other carvings. Inside, there was a lofty temple, with a dark oak ceiling supported by gilded pillars, also a bronze table, with a great deal of gaudy, tawdry decoration upon it, just such as you would imagine the Chinese would introduce into their religion. The joss, or idol, was guarded by a screen, between which you passed to see the case, hung with green curtains, containing the hideous, wizened figure, arrayed in blue and orange. Numbers of sandalwood tapers, or joss sticks, were being burnt in handfuls before him, supplied free by the man at the door, and their sweet, sickly smell pervaded the air. We were led into a courtyard at the back, where the walls were entirely covered with green and gold and black wooden squares, engraved with Chinese writing. They are tablets erected to the memory of their dead. Here there is another shrine, with 3 idols. Perhaps the center one, or patriarch, was Jain, the brother of Buddha, whom they worship, for most of the Chinese are really Buddhists. The priest, who can be known by his shaven head, without pigtail, showed this one to us, and gave me a bundle of the joss sticks. The joss house was spoiled by its untidy and neglected state, boards and planks filling up the courtyard, and showing in strange contrast against the costly mountings of the temple. We passed through a round hole in the wall of the courtyard to the garden of the joss, a little plot filled with marigolds and chrysanthemums, some trees cut into figures, a wooden head and hands being added looked curiously lifelike. After peeping in at the courthouse, where we saw that the jury and the judge are allowed their special punkah, and buying some photographs, we returned to the pier, not in the gharry, but in a jinrickshaw. We had some difficulty in finding one, for the cool of the evening, when the Chinese ladies take the air, is the time of their harvest. The jinrickshaw is a high bath chair, and translated from the Chinese signifies Pullman's car, from jin, a man, and rick, to pull. They go along silently and at a great pace. The motion is made pleasant by the high action and regular swing of the shoulders that accompanies the trot of the drawer. Neither Japanese nor Chinese think the word derogatory, unlike the Scotch who, when a gentleman took home a jinrikisha and pulled it to Edinburgh, rose in rebellion at a man being degraded into a horse. The steamer was to go at 12, but after all we might have stayed on shore and had luncheon, as he had kindly asked us to, with Mr. Harwood, for one of the officers had gone snipe hunting in the morning and shot a Chinaman by accident. He was arrested by the police, and the captain had to go ashore, arrange the compensation, procure his release, and go bail, causing us a delay of 2 hours. It was 4 p.m. when we rounded the hill and lost sight of pretty little Penang, which I like so much better than Singapore. Saturday, January 3rd. We are in the Andaman Sea today, so called from the Andaman group of islands, celebrated as the place where Lord Mayo was murdered. The smoothness of the sea is broken by white horses, which are found here when nowhere else. Captain Gardner holds the theory that the disturbance is caused by an underground passage communicating between two volcanic islands, which are now inactive. We bought yesterday in Penang a durian, which we experimented upon today. Everyone was immediately aware of its presence as it came on board. Outside it looks like a green hedgehog, and inside, the thick rind, there are about 8 or 9 custard eggs. The smell is like asafoetid acid and garlic proportioned in equal parts. It is an acquired taste, if ever it is really liked as much as people say. End of chapter 14, part 2.